I thought a trash can would be perfect for a trash thief like you. Jennifer's boss was clearly mocking her, dripping with sarcasm in his words. It was a company gathering at Jennifer's workplace, and where we were supposed to sit, a trash can had been placed instead of chairs. Hey, there's some trash lying around here. As I was shocked by his words, he threw a dirty towel he had used right at Jennifer's face. The towel missed her face but grazed her shoulder before falling to the floor. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I quickly picked up the fallen towel and threw it back at him. My name is Mike Johnson. The Johnson family has been wealthy for generations, owning numerous properties in the state. I have a wife named Jennifer, and I met her thanks to one of those properties. We met while volunteering at a soup kitchen, which was held on a property I provided. We were drawn to each other and eventually got married. By the way, Jennifer continued her job even after we got married. Jennifer works at a local confectionery company called Thomas's Company. Thomas Company donates leftover products to the soup kitchen, and as a matter of fact, the president of Thomas Company, Thomas, was my middle school classmate. We still keep in touch. When Thomas started his company, I bought shares to support him financially, so I'm a major shareholder of Thomas Company, but I don't interfere with the management. One day, Jennifer told me this: a social event next Sunday. Yes, the president, Thomas, wants to invite other local businesses and residents to enhance our connections. It's been in the works for a while, and it's finally happening. It seemed Thomas, the president, was organizing a social event with local businesses and residents. Thomas Company was just a small confectionery making local souvenirs when it started, but it has grown rapidly over the past decade and is now a publicly traded company. Thomas believes the company's growth is all thanks to the local residents who love the store and the employees who supported it. This event is meant to give back to them. Sounds lively. That's so Thomas. He always loved organizing events like this. I laughed, and Jennifer smiled. President Thomas loves seeing people have a good time. Oh, and we've been specially invited to the event. The invitation arrived this morning. Really? In that case, let's attend. What about you? Will you have any duties that day? No, I haven't been asked to help, so I'll go with you. So we prepared for the event day. It's great that it's sunny today. Really, it is. The weather was perfect, and by the time we arrived at the venue, it was already quite crowded. All right, see you later. Okay. I saw someone I knew in the crowd and decided to part ways with Jennifer for a while. About an hour later, when I headed to the guest table where we were supposed to meet, I saw Jennifer standing by the table, not sitting down. Her usually bright and cheerful face was unusually tense and somewhat puzzled. What's going on? Wondering what was troubling my wife, I squinted to get a better look. To my surprise, where our seats were supposed to be, there was a trash can instead of chairs. In front of Jennifer, who was left standing, was a man in a suit with a nasty smirk saying something to her. Sensing the tension, I hurried over to them. Soon, I heard the man say, I thought a trash can would be perfect for a trash thief like you. The man was clearly mocking Jennifer, dripping with sarcasm. I was stunned by his rudeness, but Jennifer calmly replied, For your information, I am not a thief. President Thomas has approved donating discarded products to the soup kitchen. I started to understand the situation, realizing it was about the sweets Thomas Company donates to the soup kitchen. I was angry at him for calling Jennifer a thief and was about to step in when I noticed a woman also watching the exchange with concern. She had a Thomas Company employee badge around her neck. I decided to ask her who the man insulting Jennifer was. Excuse me, who is that man sitting over there? Oh, I'm a friend of Jennifer. It looks like there's some trouble, and I'm worried. When I mentioned I was a friend of Jennifer's, the woman's wariness seemed to ease, and she responded with a complicated expression. That man is Chris, our company's finance manager. He's President Thomas's nephew, and, well, he's a bit of a problem. Apparently, Chris, Thomas' nephew, uses his position to constantly harass his subordinates, especially young female employees. Jennifer had called out his behavior, and Chris resented this, starting to harass Jennifer in retaliation. The thief accusation was just another one of Chris' baseless claims. The woman reluctantly explained the situation to me. I'm sorry. We employees should stand up to manager Chris, but I feel bad for Jennifer. Chris often flaunts his connection as the president's nephew, so no one but Jennifer dares to stand up to him. At that moment, I heard Chris' loud laugh as he continued to insult Jennifer. Hey, there's some trash lying around here. Chris then threw a dirty towel, which he had used, right at Jennifer's face. Luckily, the towel only grazed her shoulder and fell to the ground. I couldn't watch any longer. I quickly picked up the fallen towel and threw it back at Chris. Honey, weren't you taught in kindergarten that trash goes in the trash can? I glared at Chris, shielding Jennifer, who was startled by my sudden appearance. The towel I threw grazed Chris' cheek. His face turned bright red, and he kicked back his chair as he stood up, storming toward me. Hey, old man, what the hell are you doing? But I stood firm, still protecting Jennifer behind me, and retorted. I could ask you the same thing, throwing trash at someone. If you're so interested in trash, why don't you switch careers to a waste management facility? Chris, not expecting a comeback, widened his eyes in surprise but soon scowled in anger and yelled. Old man, do you know who I am? I'm Kerr. Chris stomped his feet like a child. I watched him with a mix of disdain and indifference. Then, a panicked employee who must have heard the commotion rushed over to Chris and whispered in his ear. That's Mr. Johnson, our major shareholder. What? Major shareholder? Mr. Johnson, the major shareholder. Chris's face went pale, and he stumbled backward, collapsing into the chair behind him. He muttered in a small, shocked voice, his earlier brow furrowed in disbelief. Could it be? Chris whispered, staring at me and then at Jennifer behind me. Jennifer confirmed his suspicion by calmly saying, This is my husband. Nice to meet you. I'm Mike, Jennifer's husband. It seems you've been taking good care of her, I said, glaring at Chris. He gasped in disbelief. No way. That Johnson? This old lady's husband is the major shareholder. The name Johnson is common, so Chris never imagined Jennifer was married to the major shareholder. Jennifer herself would never boast about being the wife of a major shareholder, so only a few senior employees knew we were married. Regardless of which Johnson she was, there was no excuse for his horrible insults. Staring straight at the still pale Chris, I said, By the way, I have a friend who runs a waste management facility. Coincidentally, I just met him at this event. He mentioned they're short-staffed. Shall I introduce you? Chris' eyes widened at my pointed sarcasm, but even as he sat there terrified, he stubbornly continued to whine like a spoiled child. Don't get cocky just because you're a major shareholder. You can't interfere with the company's personnel decisions. I was astonished by his audacity. Trying to act reasonable now was pointless. I suppressed a sigh and nodded slightly. Well, that's true. As a shareholder, it's not my place to meddle in company personnel decisions. But I paused, glaring intensely at Chris, and he let out a frightened squeak. I'm a shareholder. I have the right to make recommendations. After that, it's up to him to decide. I said this quietly and shifted my gaze behind Chris. Following my gaze, he turned around. There stood Thomas, the president of the company, looking furious. Uncle, Chris called out in a high-pitched voice, terrified at the sight of his enraged uncle. He collapsed to the floor, unable to stay in his chair. Thomas glared at his nephew with far more intensity than I had. You harassed Jennifer of all people. What on earth were you thinking? But I didn't know this old lady, Mrs. Johnson, was a major shareholder. Chris stammered, tearing it up while making excuses. I thought his nerve was impressive, but I wished he'd use it for better purposes. However, his excuses didn't work on his uncle. Thomas grabbed his nephew by the collar and yelled at him from close range. Jennifer is the savior of our company. Then Thomas began to recount Jennifer's story. This was before Jennifer and I met. Thomas had quit his job and used all his savings to start his company, driven by a desire to boost local industries. But back then, his marketing efforts weren't successful. Although the sweets tasted great, no customers came, and his company soon faced financial difficulties. Many products had to be discarded, and he was in trouble. Jennifer, who was then working as a clerk, suggested that they donate the unsold sweets to a local soup kitchen. Thomas thought it was a brilliant idea. It cost money to dispose of the sweets, and if his company's products could contribute to society, it was a win-win situation. At that time, Thomas didn't know I was involved with that volunteer group, so when I introduced Jennifer as my fiancée, Thomas was quite surprised. We were all grateful for the strange connection that brought us together. Anyway, Thomas' company started donating unsold sweets thanks to Jennifer's suggestion, and one day, a local media outlet featured their activities on their channel. They highlighted it as a model case of corporate social responsibility and deepening ties with the community. It was a short 5-minute segment, but it was well put together, and Thomas's good nature came through the screen. An influencer from the area happened to see the program and was deeply impressed. He shared Thomas's company's activities and products on his account in a way that resonated with younger audiences. In no time, this spread like wildfire across social media. Eventually, Thomas's company's activities were featured on a national information program. As a result, the company's popularity soared, and orders for their sweets flooded in from all over the country. The sweets were already delicious, and customers who ordered out of curiosity were surprised by the taste. Word of Thomas's company spread even more through word of mouth. A year later, Thomas' company won first place in the East region in a Best Sweets for Souvenirs ranking organized by a famous travel guidebook. Do you understand? We can host this event today all because of Jennifer's suggestion back then, Thomas said, savoring the memory, while Jennifer smiled wryly beside me. Actually, this story is Thomas' favorite when he's drunk. At our wedding, he shared the story during his best man speech, crying so much that calming him down was really tough. Even though Jennifer repeatedly told him, "Please stop, it's embarrassing," Thomas never listened. She eventually gave up. After finishing the story for his nephew, Thomas let out a big sigh, as if expelling all the air from his lungs. "Your mother begged me to hire you. She even got down on her knees. She was desperate because you kept getting fired from every job. So I reluctantly agreed to take you in." I had heard before that Thomas and his sister didn't get along well. During Thomas's company's tough times, she barely responded to his calls. But as soon as the company started doing well, she frequently visited him, pretending to be a caring relative. Despite being treated poorly, Thomas couldn't completely reject his sister, so she took advantage of his kindness and pushed her troublesome son onto him. "Uncle, please stop, not here." Chris yelled, his face turning red with shame and frustration as he was scolded in front of many employees. But Thomas didn't care about his nephew's feelings and shouted at him, "Shut up. Even someone as thoughtless as you can apologize to Jennifer and Johnson, right?" Chris' eyes darted around, but he finally gave in and hung his head. Then, in a tiny voice, he apologized to us. "I'm sorry." "I apologize as well. It was truly unacceptable for my nephew to behave so rudely," Thomas added. Seeing Thomas apologize with his nephew, Jennifer and I hurried to stop him. "It's okay. Yes, Chris' work attitude is a problem, but I didn't intend for him to be forced to apologize like this." "Exactly, Thomas. Please raise your head. As long as Jennifer and I aren't treated unfairly, that's enough, both of you." Thomas finally lifted his head at our urging, smiled warmly, and said, "Thank you." Then, turning to the crowd that had gathered during the commotion, he apologized again and spoke cheerfully to change the atmosphere. "Everyone, I'm sorry for the disturbance with our internal matter. Today at our sales booth, we are giving away one of Thomas's company's most popular deifuku to each person for free. Please stop by and get one as a memento of today's event." As Thomas, with his round face like a deifuku, smiled warmly, the crowd began to smile back. Indeed, Jennifer's suggestion might have been the turning point for Thomas's company's growth. But it's Thomas' wonderful smile and character that have kept his employees loyal and naturally attracted customers. Watching Thomas surrounded by people, I felt grateful to have such a good friend. "President, I'll help out at the sales booth," I offered. "No, Jennifer, you're a guest today," Thomas shook his head at Jennifer's eager offer. But my wife was already fully motivated, enthusiastically saying, "Leave it to me," with a triumphant pose. "I'm a part of Thomas's company too." "Then I'll help with stocking the shelves," I added. Thomas screamed, "If the major shareholder starts stocking shelves, the other employees will be terrified." In the end, the booth, where the president himself called out to customers and the major shareholder couple handled stocking and customer service, was a huge success until the event ended. As for Chris, left behind, he seemed to have no energy left to do anything. He just sat in a corner of the venue, looking dejected and blending in with the trash can. Now, for what happened next, Jennifer told me later that the day after the event, an astonishing fact about Chris was revealed at the office. Apparently, Chris had been embezzling company funds using his position as finance manager. One of his subordinates had gathered evidence and reported it to President Thomas. According to this subordinate, Chris had been a terrible boss ever since he became a manager, constantly making unbelievable mistakes and causing a lot of trouble. Seeing his behavior at the event, it wasn't hard to believe. The subordinate had tolerated Chris because he was the president's nephew, but during the event, it became clear that President Thomas wasn't entirely on Chris's side. The subordinate also realized that Chris didn't have as much power as he claimed. That's why the whistleblower took action. Although Thomas was shocked that his nephew had resorted to embezzlement, he personally led a swift investigation into the allegations. Evidence of Chris' wrongdoing was found everywhere, either because his cleanup was sloppy or he was confident he wouldn't be caught. His misconduct was confirmed. As a result, Chris was stripped of his position and reassigned to the waste disposal department. Even there, he continued to be incompetent. He miscalculated disposal estimates, shredded important documents by mistake, and even broke the machine by pressing the wrong button. Eventually, his constant mistakes became too much, and a meeting was held on site. Chris was reassigned as a janitor, handling pest control in the warehouse. I think he was lucky not to be fired outright, but who knows how Chris feels about his new role. Still, Jennifer and I hope that his uncle's wish for Chris to reflect on his actions and start over will reach him someday. As for the soup kitchen, Jennifer and I continue to volunteer regularly. We married late and don't have children of our own, but because of that, we want to ensure the children who come here can eat their fill without worry. Seeing their smiles as they enjoy a warm meal or a sweet from Thomas' company fills us with a sense of fulfillment. This activity, which has brought us together in such a special way, is something Jennifer and I are committed to supporting as much as we can in the future.